David, skeptics, of course, claim climate change is one big hoax. Now, you've been to both poles, you've trekked through the Amazon. What proof have you gathered the threat is actually imminent?
I think what's really important is that we've seemed to have narrowed our environmental issues just to carbon and to energy. And really what's far more important is actually looking at what I call our human fingerprints. At this point in time, it's about adaptation. We have to start spending money, fast on the solutions that we have in hand to try and help these countries which are already seeing the effects of climate change. Pollution is one thing that we need to focus on. And myself sitting in the North Pole up in April, one of the most inhospitable places in the world, and really only seeing temperatures of -1 or 0 degrees and sweating in my tent at the North Pole makes it very clear to me that we have to do something.
I think we all accept we're in a period of global warming, but a lot of people are panicking. Are they right to panic?
No. They should relax, because if they were to go and look at the natural history of the Earth, which has all been unravelled since these climate myths were created by the UN, they'd find that actually what is happening now is almost totally normal. It goes up and down about 1 degree at the equator, 2 degrees at the poles, about every 1,000 years. The rate of rise is not unusual either. It's about 1 degree in a century.
So we've got on one side, we've got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we've got thousands of supposed experts,
yep,
all stuffing stuff into their models. Why are they wrong?
Well, because their presumptions that they feed into their models are wrong, and I think we talked briefly about this. It's called GIGO, garbage in, garbage out.
That's the point.
And one of the assumptions they put in is there's no natural change. So if the change that they assign to carbon dioxide is actually natural, there is no anomalous additional change to be observed, so it's not actually happening.
So, in a sense, you think that people are panicking unnecessarily, and we've been warming now for the last sort of 150 years or so, give or take. There's something interesting about that period, isn't it? Tell us about that.
We are at 1 degree above the coldest it's been in the last 10,000 years. And the other remarkable thing is it's 2 degrees cooler than the warmest it's been in the last 10,000 years, which is the Egyptian and the Minoan period.
The IPCC, they always talk about that we are 1 degree higher than the pre-industrialization period, that 150 years ago. But what you're saying, Brian, is that was the lowest point in the last 10,000 years.
Correct.
And that it's been much warmer in 2 or 3 previous periods.
Yes, and in the last interglacial, which was 130,000 years ago, and it's well known, this is natural history, and it was 6 degrees warmer than it is now. And there were humans wandering around the place, presumably hunter-gathering happily. We're a tropical species.
In 2011, my wife and I were in Antarctica. There is a $500 million scientific facility there, and the scientists came to give us presentations about global warming. And they had cores of ice that they had drilled. They had drilled 4,000 or 5,000 cores, and they only brought 15 or 20. So they're going through the second or third core, and they said 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. This is 2011. And I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And I said, well, what about the things that the young woman alluded to? And he said, it's all cyclical. And although the gas may have exacerbated it, in the cosmos of time, it's not a fart in the wind. In the cosmos of time, of the 13.8 billion years that we've been on this miserable planet, it's not a fart in the wind. Now, my direct answer to your question, if that were really true, which you believe, and let's just for a moment say that it is true. That means that the best scenario vis-a-vis global warming is about 10 feet raise in water. That's the best scenario over the next 40, 50 years. That's the best scenario. The worst scenario is about 100 feet. But let's just take the 10 feet. If the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. Most of Europe is gone. Most of Central America is gone. If that's the case, let's just take Florida, for example, which is one of the fastest growing beachfront condominiums on the planet. In the prospectus, when you invest, there should be, in the footnotes, if global warming is for real, they won't put it that way, global warming happens and water rises 10 feet, this investment you made is fuck all. Not one single investment prospectus written since 2000, this century, has alluded to global warming. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. Not one condominium. And I'm jealous of the Vice President, Gore. I am jealous he came up with a scam before I did. Because the financial institutions, the banks of this world know it's not going to happen. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. With the greatest respect, ma'am, it's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.
I feel like it's getting a little bit out of hand. The constant reminder that we are doomed, the constant reminder that within decades it's all over. And indeed, Sharon said, we are not going to survive. And indeed, no one ran from the room. In fact, most of you barely looked up from your mobile phones at the prospect of non-survival. It's become so hyperbolic that no one really knows how to get anyone's attention at all. The first argument they often give is that it's going to hurt future growth. It's going to hit GDP in year number, whatever it is, 2100. They reckon it's going to lop off 2.5%. Their worst case models lops off 5%. What they fail to tell everybody, of course, is between now and 2100, economies are going to grow a lot. 2 years ago, GDP growth stopped. Europe has a GDP per capita 40% lower than the US. It's okay. 5% in the year 2100 is more or less irrelevant. For most companies with stranded assets, and even for tech, their valuation does not take into account anything that happens after about year 20. At a big bank like ours, at HSBC, what do people think the average loan length is? It's 6 years. Imagine you were in 1920 and we're at this conference and somebody said, Stuart, what do you think the effect on growth will be of carbon emissions over the next 100 years? And I'd get out my model. I go, okay, well, there's a lot of industry. That doesn't look very good. And we would put together a really, really nasty outlook for today from what we knew in 1930. We would never have understood the deindustrialization. We would never have understood the rise of the service economy. We would never have understood how GDP is getting lighter. We would never understand how machinery is getting more efficient. The markets are crashing around our ears today and yesterday for nothing to do with climate.
Clear, Mr. Kinney's not a scientist. I am. He's the CEO of the Weather Channel now. I was the founder of the Weather Channel, not the co-founder.
And I'm glad you did, because I am addicted to the Weather Channel. I watch a lot of cable news.
Now, hold on just a minute. I'm not done. And CNN has taken a very strong position on global warming that it is a consensus. Well, there is no consensus in science. Science isn't a vote. Science is about facts. And if you get down to the hard, cold facts, climate change is not happening. There is no significant man-made global warming now. There hasn't been any in the past, and there's no reason to expect any in the future. There's a whole lot of baloney, and yes, it has become a big political point of the Democratic Party and part of their platform, and I regret it's become political instead of scientific, but the science is on my side.
I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion about the topic right here. What I do wonder,
I know
though, is
we're
when
not,
you
because
see
you wouldn't allow it to happen on CNN. But I'm happy that I got on the air and got a chance to talk to your viewers. Hello, everybody. There is no global warming.
What I do wonder is when you see the government, when you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up? What I don't understand is how you square that.
Well, that's a manipulated figure, and let me explain it to you. The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis of the Democrat Party position. So they don't have any choice. If you're going to get the money, you got to support their position. Therefore, 97% of the scientific reports published support global warming. Why? Because those are the ones the government pays for, and that's where the money is. It's real simple. But that doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't make it true. That only makes it bought and paid for. The money goes in circles.
I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to try to refute you on
that's
the facts.
the truth.
I'll simply say that the vast majority...
Please stand back from this issue and let the two sides be on the air.
The advantage of having been in BP is I learned about the energy system. And so I actually know quite a bit about how the energy system currently works. And a lot of people who want to change the energy system have no idea at all of how it works. And so they can do great damage.
You're very clear about this. You believe the climate is changing.
Climate is changing.
You
Absolutely.
believe that human beings are having an effect.
They are influencing those changes, yes.
Your position, though, is that there's either an exaggeration or there's a way that people are looking at the data that's alarmist that you don't think is reflected by the actual numbers themselves.
Yeah, that's correct. The American Physical Society asked me to do a review of their statement about climate science, which was very controversial among the physicists because it used the word incontrovertible. And for a physicist, that's fighting words. And so I convened a one-day meeting with 3 mainstream climate scientists and 3 credentialed skeptical scientists. And I came away from that thinking this science is not anywhere near as settled as I thought it was. People would say things like, we can't say that even if it's true because it gives ammunition to the deniers.
So there's all this data that shows the ups and the downs, and there's all this data that shows that sometimes they're losing ice and sometimes they're losing less ice and gaining ice. How do they know what is causing this, or do they just assume that
they don't? They don't. Okay, it is, it's a combination of modeling and physical principles and other data that let them try to say how much is natural variability and how much is human influence. And instead, in the media, all you hear is that it's been melting faster and faster over the last 2 decades. This is determined from geology, and you can see we started 20,000 years ago, and to the present, it's gone up about 120
So
meters.
A lot of this is post-Ice Age.
That's right. The glaciers were melting.
Right.
They started melting 20,000 years ago. And what's interesting is that about 8,000 years ago, things slowed down a lot, as you can see.
Yeah.
Okay.
It flattens out.
It flattens out. It's not completely flat. The real issue is not whether sea level is rising. As you can see, it's been rising for 20,000 years. The real issue is how fast is it rising and whether human influences are making it rise fast. For the time that we've had accurate measurements, with tide gauges and so on, it's been going up at less than a foot a century, all right? And we've been perfectly fine in adapting to it.
And you think that that's going to continue to happen?
Well, who can say what's really going to happen in the future? But if I had a bet, I would. And, the politicians believe that, too. I mean, you see the former President Obama, you see Bill Gates, all of whom are raising alarm. They got houses on the beachfront. All right? So if he really believed that, he'd be living in Colorado or something. All right? Okay.
Now,
I would love to be on a stage with some of these scientists.
What about on a podcast? One of the things that I understand that this is going to be a very controversial podcast. I would like to get someone to come on opposite of you next, and maybe...
I would certainly be up for that, but let me tell you what you should do. Have somebody else on, and you can have them say where that guy Koonin is wrong. Mm-hmm. Get him to write it down, and then get the two of us on together, and let's have a discussion.
Have you debated anyone about this?
So I have not debated anybody about this. My feeling is that I won't debate the science. So the science is set.
Why wouldn't you debate the science?
Because the science has already been debated in the scientific system.
A debate would be very beneficial.
I disagree with that entirely. Because
how so?
Because in a one-on-one debate, without the ability to fact check people, how do I do that? He says this paper says this, and I'm saying, do you want me to read the paper?
Yeah.
Well, it would be a debate that would take a week.
I think it would take a week, but there's certain points that you could get where you would go over them and we could kind of establish those points in advance. Like, where's the disagreement?
The scientific system of peer-reviewed papers followed by replication. Important results are always replicated by other people. That's how science determines what is right.
What he said is that he got into this because he brought a bunch of people together to discuss what the science is, and he said the science is not nearly as settled as he thought it was when he first started examining it. This can be settled. At least it can be explained in a way that a rational person could have a more informed opinion of what's going on.
Yeah, I think you overestimate the ability to settle these issues in a debate.